Some people have noticed that a lot of highly authoritarian, my way or the highway parents also tend to support highly authoritarian political leaders. But what if I told you that it was much deeper than that? What if I told you that authoritarianism at the macro political level and at the family micro level are both the same thing, because both rely on dominating others through power? And what if I then told you that the reason for both of those abuses of power is quite often narcissism, a personality style that hinges on dominating others in order to self-regulate your own emotions? Once you understand this crucial lesson, everything will sort of click for you. You'll start to understand that a mother telling her child, "because I said so," is just a micro-level version of a politician invading another country simply because he can. You'll start to understand why that mother is so drawn to that politician in the first place, and you'll start to understand how much of life boils down to power, hierarchy, and narcissism. Okay, so question, have you ever noticed an overlap between authoritarian parents and support for authoritarian politicians? Let me know down in the comments. Also, before we get started on today's topic, my novel, The Splintered Parts, is officially releasing August 14th. This is somewhere between psychological thriller and psychological horror with a dark academia setting. Link to learn more about the book and also pre-order it is down below in the description. Thanks so much. Okay, so let's first define authoritarianism. Authoritarianism on the societal political level is a type of government which demands total power and suppresses the liberties of its citizens. Authoritarianism can fall anywhere on the political spectrum. There have been both left-wing authoritarians and right-wing authoritarians across history. Modern-day authoritarianism tends to be more present in right-leaning governments. It is no coincidence then that authoritarianism is also one of the four parenting styles. The four parenting styles fall on two axes: responsiveness and demandingness. An authoritarian parenting style is low in responsiveness and highly demanding. These are the parents who consider themselves to be the monarchs of the house, who say, this household is not a democracy, who don't care much about their children's vote or their rights, who control their kids considerably but don't pair that control with warmth. The opposite of this parenting style is permissive, where a parent is highly warm and responsive but demands nothing from their child, basically treating them like an equal instead of like a vulnerable person who they must protect through appropriate boundaries and rules. Neither of these parenting styles are particularly healthy. The golden standard is considered the authoritative parenting style, authoritative, not authoritarian, where a parent is still the leader of the family and sets certain rules, but they also don't abuse their power by over-controlling their children, and they pair their leadership with warmth and a fair democratic attitude. Do you see what I'm getting at here? Political leaders have parenting styles for their citizens. They can be authoritarian, like Putin in Russia, or they can be permissive, like an anarchy, or they can be authoritative, like, say, Nordic countries, which do have certain rules and high expectations, like that their citizens pay taxes, but they also afford their citizens ample freedoms to choose as adults. Authoritarian parents are to families precisely what authoritarian leaders are to countries. They follow the same leadership style where they feel entitled to controlling those below them on the hierarchy of power to the point where they restrict their freedoms. And what is the core of that leadership style? Entitlement, aggressive dominance, exploitativeness, lack of empathy, a desire to be seen as superior to others, essentially all the traits that encompass narcissism. Now, I want to be clear that not all those who are drawn to authoritarianism in either parenting or politics are narcissists, but there's a clear documented relationship there, where those with dark personalities, particularly narcissism, are more likely to support authoritarianism both inside and outside the home, such as this recent study which found that those with antagonistic personalities like narcissism, psychopathy, and sadism tended to value a stricter adherence to tradition and a greater willingness to punish rule breakers, suggesting that some use authoritarianism as a way of expressing their hostility towards others. Other studies have also shown a correlation between parental narcissism and authoritarian parenting. So let's talk about how narcissism creates authoritarian leaders at both the micro and the macro level. At the family level, a parent who is deep down very insecure and low in empathy will use their power as a parent to try and regulate their self-esteem. So they're going to resort to behaviors like over-controlling their child to feel superior or dominant, mistreating their child child when they struggle to regulate their own emotions, relying on fear for obedience, restricting their child's freedoms because they don't see their child as an autonomous human being, only as an extension of them, supporting their child only insofar as the child makes them look good by association, sort of this like conditional acceptance that is very dependent on reputation and legacy as a family, worrying too much about what people will think, especially what people will think about them as a parent given their child's choices, placing too much emphasis on the hierarchy between parent and child, dismissing a child's opinions or feelings simply because they hold less power in the family system. Now, at the societal level, narcissistic leaders do exactly the same thing. They restrict their citizens' rights and freedoms because it gives them a greater sense of total power and domination. They mistreat citizens in order to keep them afraid and suppressed. They're often quite nationalistic, where they view the one in-group that they belong to as superior to all other out-groups, fueling this collective sense of narcissism through a sense of superiority. The thing you have to understand is that narcissistic leaders come to power in nations that are already struggling with collective narcissism. Typically, these nations are fractured by poverty and inequality, by things that are not working well in that country, and the citizens become so enamored with the promise of grandiosity and dominance provided by a highly narcissistic politician because it makes them feel better about their unconscious sense of inferiority. Deep down, the citizens are extremely insecure. They're wondering, is this country that great? Clearly everyone around me is struggling. They know their country's not doing well. They themselves can feel the brunt of that, but consciously, they want to defend against those feelings of grief and inferiority by electing a politician who seems convinced of his own superiority and about the nation's superiority compared to other nations. Because if they can have a politician who thinks himself superior to others, then they can also feel superior to other countries. It's why Carl Jung described Hitler's rise to power as the shadow of the German people. The German people at the time were struggling, and they democratically elected, a politician who would become one of the most heinous dictators in history. You know, people sometimes say, damn, this specific politician ruined your country. No, the country elected that politician because it was already ruined. Narcissism and authoritarianism increase when a country feels defeated and broken down. A healthy country doesn't elect an authoritarian narcissist. So you see, authoritarian leaders arise out of countries with already fragile self-esteem because narcissism is a defense against deep self-loathing at both the individual and the collective levels. So it makes sense then why narcissistic and authoritarian parents are often drawn to authoritarian politicians. Very often, those who try to feel superior in their individual relationships also crave a sense of collective superiority, where they think that the group to which they belong is also superior to other groups, what's called collective narcissism. It's why so many very overly strict hierarchical parents love narcissistic, authoritarian, nationalistic politicians. The politician feels like a balm to their wounded self-esteem. Plus, the politician enforces their worldview, that human beings fall on a hierarchy of power, where the people with the most power are entitled to disrespecting the rights and dignity of those with less power. They practice this on the micro level, and of course they support politicians doing the same thing on a macro level. This brings up a very important age-old question. Does power corrupt? Recently, one of my patrons sent me a fascinating video on this topic, asking if it's true that basically power anesthetizes empathy towards those with less power. By the way, if you want to become a patron, support the channel, I post exclusive videos and essays on there every month. I also have a running series called Cocktail Hour, where I take topic and reaction requests from patrons while making a cocktail recipe. So check it out down below. So anyway, I took a look at the research into this topic, and it was honestly a lot worse than I expected. So there's a study from 2006 where participants were primed with power, and those participants were less inclined to spontaneously adopt another person's visual perspective. They were also less likely to take into account that other people did not possess their privileged knowledge, suggesting that they focus too much on their own perspectives and stop considering other people's perspectives. They were also less accurate at determining other people's emotional expressions, showing a possible impediment to experiencing empathy. And the general conclusion was that power was associated with a reduced tendency to comprehend how other people see, think, and feel. But this study has quite a few limitations, namely, it's from 2006, so it's kind of old in terms of research. It's very experimental. It's not necessarily necessarily applicable to like what would happen out in the world. So I read a little bit more. I looked into a Q&A with a neurologist who researches the effects of power, and he said this: going back to the mirror system in the brain, when you put people in a state of high power, the tendency towards mirroring and simulation tends to be reduced. Social psychologists would say that as power increases, so does social distance. You become less attuned to other people and enter a potentially more egocentric frame of mind. Another researcher on the effects of wealth on empathy talks about the rigged Monopoly experiment. He says the person who was assigned to be the rich player had double the advantages in so many ways, and we noticed their patterns of behavior begin to shift. They became more dominant in their behavior. They, for instance, started moving around the board in a louder fashion, smacking the board with their game piece. They took up more space at the board, so they actually became more expansive in their posture. They're more likely to fan their money out than to keep it confined to a little stack, so they're more likely to sort of showcase how well they're doing. And over the course of the game, we noticed that just in their nonverbal behavior to the other person, they became way less sort of sensitive to the plight of the poor players and way more likely to talk about and showcase how well they were doing. So what that tells us a little bit is that you can create this kind of rigged experience of privilege through the flip of a coin and get someone to experience that privilege and actually start to manifest as if they deserve that privilege in certain ways within an experience. They were way more likely to talk about the things they'd done, their skill at the game, their decisions, the properties they'd bought. They'd just talk about decisions they'd made as opposed to talking about that flip of a coin that randomly, and through no action of their own, got them to experience that privileged position in the first place. Again, some more drawbacks to this study. It's very contrived, it's not a very natural setting. And also in real life, there is some level of effort that goes into people's outcomes. It's not all just the flip of a coin, although luck definitely plays a role. So reading about this research kind of made me reconsider some of my beliefs, because the way I had always seen things was, it's not that power corrupts, it's just that power brings up the type of person that you were all along. But it seems like based on the research, there is genuinely evidence that power to some extent does make us a little bit more grandiose and makes us have less empathy for those with less power. And what are the implications of that? When the people with the most power, the people running the world, have less empathy for the people they're leading. But does this mean that power automatically corrupts? Not necessarily. Just like not all parents are authoritarian tyrants, even though they hold more power than their children, just because someone has more power doesn't mean they're going to weaponize and abuse that power. However, power does make it more likely that a person will reduce their empathy for those with less power than them. I would be very cautious of making black and white statements like all powerful people are evil, all wealthy people are evil, all billionaires are evil. The moment we start judging people based on a group to which they belong rather than their own individual actions, the more we're being intellectually lazy and unfair, the more we're likely to dehumanize that person. How can we dehumanize someone just because they belong to a certain group while complaining that they dehumanize us because we belong to a certain group? It's logically inconsistent, it's hypocritical. You have to pick one. Either you're not okay with people dehumanizing others and you also don't do it, or you're okay with dehumanizing others and you also do it. Think about like if you were to win the lottery tomorrow and you did everything in your power to be ethical, to help others, to maintain empathy, to improve the lives of others. Wouldn't it be pretty hurtful if then someone came up to you and assumed you're a bad person now just because you hold power? The moral of the story isn't that powerful people are always bad, or that having differences in power is always bad. It's that power has a tendency to corrupt, to make us think that we're above others, and that this is something we must constantly keep in check anytime we gain power. I feel like it's also important to specify that this whole discussion is not an endorsement of permissive parenting or leadership. It might be tempting for people to hear about the abuses of power that are common in authoritarianism and to think, damn, so I need to do the opposite of that. So I need to be a permissive parent. So I need to experience anarchy in society. Remember, the healthiest parenting style is not the opposite of authoritarianism. It's the parenting style between authoritarian and permissive parenting, authoritative parenting. We're addressing one extreme in this video, but that doesn't mean that the other extreme is the solution either. And I actually have entire videos on why permissive parenting is not good either. Typically, anything very extreme has severe drawbacks. The best solution is typically measured and moderate. In this case, the solution is authoritative leadership, where there are still leaders both in families and governments helping protect the underlings that they're in charge of protecting, but they go about it in ways which preserve the rights, dignity, and freedoms of those underlings. In parenting, that means treating children as valuable individuals who still get a say in their lives, even while maintaining certain rules for their kids' safety. In politics, this means letting citizens choose what's right for them, even while setting certain boundaries to make sure that they don't hurt others and to make sure that they're positively contributing to society. What do you think about this topic? Thank you so much for watching.
Tell me what you mean.